Hey everybody, it's Mr. Bishop. I just wanted to provide these slides to you in a screencast format that we went over today in class. So here is writing lab reports, once again, just for you guys to review as you write your lab reports over the holiday weekend. Again, what is a lab report? A lab report is documented experimentation, evidence, and persuasion submitted by scientists. After performing research, scientists want to convince others their research is valid. They do so through a lab report. They present their research in a format that peers can review, test, and validate their research independently. So if a scientist who had never met another scientist wanted to test that scientist's research, they would be able to take their lab report, their published study, reproduce and test those experiments, and if they came up with the same results, they would validate that research. The format of traditional lab reports includes the following sections: titles, abstracts, introductions, materials and methods, results, discussion, literature cited. There's lots of lab reports that can be found on the internet, and I will be sure to provide a link via Schoology for you guys to go see some examples of journal articles that are published lab reports. Our lab report, I only want 4 sections. I would like a title for our first lab. We want these 4 sections: introduction, methods, results and data, and discussion and conclusion. Introduction. The introduction defines the subject of the report. It must outline the scientific purpose or objectives for the research performed and give the reader sufficient background to understand the rest of the report. Care should be taken to limit the background to whatever is pertinent to the experiment. A good introduction will answer several questions, including the following. Focus on answering these 3 questions as you do your lab report, especially your introduction section, since this is the introduction questions. Why was this study performed? Answers to this question may be derived from the observations of nature or from the literature. What knowledge already exists about this subject? The answer to this question must review the literature, your notes, showing the historical development of an idea and including the confirmations, conflicts, and gaps in existing knowledge. What is the specific purpose of the study? The specific hypothesis and experimental design pertinent to investigating the topic should be described. So what are we testing in this lab? What piece of information that we didn't know did we find in this lab, or we're trying to find in this lab? Materials and methods. As the name implies, the materials and methods used in the experiments should be reported in this section. The difficulty in writing this section is to provide enough detail for the reader to understand the experiment without overwhelming him or her. When procedures from a lab book or another report are followed exactly, simply cite the work, noting that details can be found in that particular source. Again, we don't need to worry about that, as we're not citing any other lab reports or sources for ours, so don't worry about making citations. If we do at some point in the future, I'll be sure to acknowledge that and make sure you guys are citing sources. However, it is still necessary to describe special pieces of equipment and the general theory of the assays used. Assays is another word for experiments. So what tests did we run in our lab? This can usually be done in a short paragraph, possibly along with drawing of the experimental apparatus. Generally, this section attempts to answer the following questions. So when you're doing your methods, what materials did you use and how were they used? Where and when was the work done? This question is most important in field studies. So field studies are when we are doing lab work outside in the field, not in a controlled environment within the confines of our classroom. Results. The results section should summarize the data from the experiments without discussing their implications. So there's no discussion of the results. You're just telling us what you found while doing your experiment. The data should be organized into tables, figures, graphs, photographs, and so on. but data included in a table should not be duplicated in a figure or graph. So don't give us the same data twice. Give it once in one format. All figures and tables should have descriptive titles and should include a legend explaining any symbols, abbreviations, or special methods used. So, like we discussed in class, don't put in your report simply a number. The number 480 has no meaning without a label. And if we say 480 cells in a table, then that table needs a title, because we don't know what we mean by 480 cells without saying that we are counting the number of cells per field in that table. So labels and titles and being as clear as possible with your data is critically important to successful lab reports. Figures and tables should be numbered separately and should be referred to in the text by number. For example, Figure 1 shows that activity decreased after 5 minutes. The activity decreased after 5 minutes. See Figure 1 in parentheses. Figures and tables should be self-explanatory. That is, the reader should be able to understand them without referring to the text. All columns and rows in tables and axes in figures should be labeled. So if we create a table, make sure it's labeled again. And take a look at your data tables. Take a look at your graphs. Make sure somebody who didn't know what the lab was about, someone who just looked at your data table would know what we were doing in the lab without going back and reading your introduction or your method section. This section of your report should concentrate on general trends and differences and not trivial details. Trivial details are for discussion and conclusions. Many authors organize and write their results section before the rest of the report. If you want to start in your data section, your results section, and then work back to your introduction, your methods, and your conclusion, that's just fine. And the discussion and conclusion. This section should not just be a restatement of the results. It should emphasize interpretation of the data, relating them to existing theory and knowledge. Speculation is appropriate. If it is so identified, suggestions for the improvement of techniques or experimental design may also be included here. In writing this section, you should explain the logic that allows you to accept or reject your original hypothesis. You should also be able to suggest future experiments that might clarify areas of doubt in your results. Remember, when you're writing your conclusion, you have your checklist. Take a look at your checklist. Go through it. Ask yourselves these questions as you are rereading your conclusion. Did you summarize and include data or results essential to your conclusions? Did you clearly explain your conclusions using your data or results? Are there any additional experiments that you would perform to explore unanswered questions? Were there any questions not answered by our procedure in our labs? Was there a missing piece of data that we didn't have? Did you discuss any real-world applications related to this information? Did you use complete sentences? Did you check for spelling and punctuation errors? Did you cite sources where necessary? And did you use the correct citation format? Did you anticipate any questions the reader may have? Now, these are some new slides that we didn't have in class, but I thought these would help you guys in writing your lab reports this weekend. General comments on style. All scientific names, genus, and species must be italicized. Underlining indicates italics in a typed paper. Use the metric system of measurements. Abbreviations of units are used without a following period. Be aware that the word data is plural, while datum is singular. This affects the choice of a correct verb. The word species is used both as a singular and as a plural. Numbers should be written as numerals when they are greater than 10 or when they are associated with measurements. For example, 6 millimeters or 2 grams, but 2 explanations of 6 factors. When one list includes numbers over and under 10, all numbers in the list may be expressed as numerals. For example, 17 sunfish, 13 bass, and 2 trout. Never start a sentence with numerals. Spell all numbers beginning sentences. Be sure to divide paragraphs correctly and to use starting and ending sentences that indicate the purpose of the paragraph. A report or a section of a report should not be one long paragraph. Every sentence must have a subject and a verb. Avoid using the first person, I or we, in writing. Keep your writing impersonal, in the third person, and instead of saying, we weighed the frogs and put them in a glass jar, write, the frogs were weighed and put in a glass jar. Avoid the use of slang and the overuse of contractions. Be consistent in the use of tense throughout a paragraph. Do not switch between past and present. It is best to use past tense when writing lab reports. Be sure that pronouns refer to antecedents. For example, in a statement, sometimes Cecropia caterpillars are in cherry trees, but they are hard to find. Does they, the antecedent, refer to the caterpillars or trees? So we've had 2 nouns, and then we're using a pronoun they, and we don't know whether it's referring to the caterpillars or the cherry tree. So, after writing a report, read it over, watching especially for a lack of precision and for ambiguity. Each sentence should present a clear message. The following examples illustrate lack of precision. The sample was incubated in mixture A minus B plus C. Does the mixture lack both B and C, or lack B and contain C? The title, Protection Against Carcinogens by Antioxidants, leaves the reader wondering whether antioxidants protect from or cause cancer. The only way to prevent such errors is to read and think about what you write. Learn to reread and edit your work. Alright, there's our chart again. So, I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please send me a message on Schoology while writing your lab report. Again, I would prefer submissions via Schoology in the materials section. If you do not have access to a computer, you can hand in a hard copy first thing Tuesday morning. I hope you all enjoy your holiday weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday. Bye, guys.